My family forged my signature, stole my inheritance, and laughed. My grandmother had left me something they never found. The probate attorney's office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and document fees. I was sitting across from my cousin Derek when he slid the folder toward me and smiled. It was the specific smile of someone who has already spent the money they are about to tell you doesn't exist. He said my grandmother had changed her will in the final weeks of her life. He said I'd received my share. He set a certified check on the table for $11,000. I looked at the check. I looked at him. Then I reached into my jacket and placed a single document on the table between us. Derek stopped smiling. But to understand what that document was, and why it ended what it ended, I need to go back 14 years. My name is Nathan Calloway. I am a licensed forensic accountant. I have been doing this work for 19 years, the last 11 of them independently, operating a small firm out of Portland, Oregon, that handles financial fraud investigations, estate disputes, and the specific category of case that gets referred to quietly by attorneys who have already tried everything else and found nothing. I am not a dramatic person. I am trained to be the opposite of dramatic. My job, reduced to its core, is to sit with numbers until the numbers tell me what happened. Numbers do not lie. They do not get confused or misremember. They do not protect people they love. A figure that does not reconcile with another figure is not a matter of interpretation. It is a fact waiting to be found. I grew up in Medford, Oregon. My father left when I was 6. My mother, Carol Calloway, raised me and my younger sister Diane on a teacher's salary that never quite covered everything but always covered enough. We were not poor, we were precise. My mother kept a ledger on the kitchen counter, a green-covered notebook where she recorded every household expense by hand, weekly, without fail. Groceries, utilities, school supplies. The entry for my 8th grade science fair project reads, poster board and markers, $4.30. I watched her do this every Sunday morning for 11 years. I don't think she knew she was teaching me anything. She thought she was balancing a household. She was, in fact, teaching me the single most useful thing I would ever learn, that every transaction leaves a record, and every record, if you are patient enough, tells the truth. I went to University of Oregon on a partial academic scholarship. I graduated in 2001 with a degree in accounting and a secondary focus in forensic document analysis, a specialty I chose because a professor named Dr. Margaret Voss told me in my junior year that the most valuable thing a numbers person could learn was how to read paper, not spreadsheets. Paper, the kind that gets altered. I remember thinking that was an unusual thing to say. 14 years later, sitting across from Derek in that probate office, I understood exactly what she meant. My grandmother's name was Ruth Eleanor Calloway. She was 81 years old when she died on a Tuesday in March, and she was, without question, the person in my life who most consistently meant what she said. She had lived in the same house in Grants Pass, Oregon for 47 years. A 2-story Craftsman on a half-acre lot that she and my grandfather had bought in 1971 for $32,000. My grandfather died in 2003. My grandmother stayed. She kept the yard the way he had kept it. She kept his chair at the head of the table. She kept, in a cedar box on her bedroom dresser, every card and letter any grandchild had ever sent her, organized by year and held together with rubber bands she replaced every January. She also kept, in a fireproof lockbox in the closet behind her winter coats, documents. I did not know about the lockbox until after she died. I did not know about its contents until 8 months after that. What I knew, in the years before she died, was what she had told me directly. In 2015, 3 years before her death, my grandmother sat across from me at her kitchen table, over coffee she had made too strong, the way she always made it, and she told me what she intended to leave behind. The house appraised at $412,000. There was a brokerage account containing $267,000 in index funds she had contributed to, without exception, every single month since 1988. There was a savings account with $44,000. There were 11 acres of timberland in Josephine County that had been in the family since 1959 and was valued conservatively at $190,000. Total estate value at the time of her death, $914,000. Confirmed by the independent appraisal I commissioned 14 months after her funeral. She told me it would be divided equally. 4 grandchildren, equal shares, approximately $228,000 each. She looked at me when she said it. She held my eyes for a long moment. She said, "I want you to be able to build something that lasts." I believed her. I should have also believed what she told me next. There are 4 grandchildren in the Calloway family. I am the second oldest. My cousin Derek is the oldest, and the first thing you should understand about Derek Calloway is that he has never, in 46 years of living, treated money as something you earn. He treats it as something that is owed to him by virtue of proximity to people who have it. He is my Uncle Gerald's son. Gerald is my grandmother's oldest child and, from the time I was approximately 9 years old, the person who managed her finances. Not because he was qualified. Gerald has a sales background and a long history of businesses that peaked early, but because he was present. He lived 12 minutes from my grandmother. He had a key to her house. He drove her to appointments. These are real services, genuinely provided, and I do not discount them. But services rendered and authority granted are different things. And in the Calloway family, presence had always converted into power in ways that weren't examined closely enough. My mother saw it. She mentioned it to me once, carefully, when I was in my mid-20s. She said, "Just know that Gerald will always position himself as the person holding the door, and people who hold doors for long enough start to believe the house is theirs." I filed that away and said nothing. The other two grandchildren are my sister Diane, who is 38 years old and lives in Ashland, and our cousin Patricia, who is 42 and lives in Seattle. Neither of them had a close relationship with the financial side of family affairs. Diane trusted me. Patricia trusted Derek, which was a mistake she would eventually understand. My grandmother's relationship with Gerald was affectionate and, I believe, she loved her son. She also, I came to understand much later, had concerns about him that she had not shared widely. She had, instead, done something characteristically quiet and characteristically deliberate. She had documented everything. She had kept records the way my mother kept her green ledger, not because she expected to need them, because she was a woman who had lived long enough to know that the things you are most certain about are the things most worth writing down. My grandmother's funeral was on a Saturday in late March. The service was at a Presbyterian church she had attended for 30 years. Approximately 90 people came. Afterward, there was a reception at Gerald's house that I attended for an hour and left, because the conversation had turned, within 40 minutes of my grandmother's burial, to the subject of the house in Grants Pass. I noticed it. I cataloged it the way I cataloged discrepancies, without reaction, with accuracy. Derek was in the kitchen talking to Patricia about square footage comparable sales in Josephine County. Gerald was in the living room talking to his attorney, a man named Thomas Vetter, who I knew by reputation and who specialized in estate administration. I drove home. I did not mention what I had heard to Diane. 6 weeks later, my mother called me on a Wednesday evening. She told me that Gerald had phoned her that afternoon to let her know that the estate was in probate, that the process would take 4 to 6 months, and that my grandmother had made some changes to her planning in the final year of her life that the family should be aware of. My mother asked what changes. Gerald said the attorney would explain everything in due time. My mother repeated this conversation to me word for word. I am certain of the accuracy because she is her mother's daughter, and she had written it down. I hung up the phone and sat at my desk. I pulled up the Oregon Probate Court's public records portal, which I have used professionally for the better part of a decade, and I searched my grandmother's name. The filing had been submitted 4 days after her funeral. The listed executor was Gerald Allen Calloway. The listed attorney of record was Thomas Vetter. I noted the filing date. I noted the speed of it. I set the information aside and I waited, the way my training had taught me to wait, with patience and without conclusions. 8 months after my grandmother's funeral, I received a letter from Thomas Vetter's office, informing me that the estate had cleared probate and that my distribution was ready for collection. The letter stated that I had received a bequest of $11,000, consistent with my grandmother's revised testamentary intentions, and that I could collect the check at a scheduled appointment. I read the letter twice. I set it on my desk. I called a colleague named Sandra Park. Sandra Park is 53 years old. She spent 14 years as a forensic document examiner for the Oregon Department of Justice before opening her private practice in 2018. She works exclusively on questioned document cases, will contests, signature fraud, altered instruments. She is precise in the way that people who have testified in federal court more than 30 times are precise. She does not offer opinions. She offers findings. And she distinguishes between the two with a sharpness that other experts sometimes find uncomfortable. I asked Sandra to examine the documents filed with the Josephine County Probate Court under my grandmother's name. Specifically, I asked her to compare the signature on the revised will, dated 11 months before my grandmother's death, against the signatures on file in the county recorder's office from deeds my grandmother had signed in 2008 and 2013. Sandra's preliminary findings took 9 days. She called me on a Thursday morning at 8:47. She said, "Nathan, the baseline signatures from 2008 and 2013 show consistent characteristics across 17 measurable points: letter formation, pen pressure, baseline angle, connection strokes." She paused. "The signature on the revised will match as 11 of those 17 points." She paused again. "A living person's signature drifts over time. 11 out of 17 is not drift. It is a different hand attempting to replicate a known signature without access to enough source material." I sat at my desk for a moment without speaking. She said, "I can produce a sworn expert report. It will be 16 pages. I said, "How long?" She said, 2 weeks if you need it fast." I said. Then I logged into the Oregon Secretary of State's notary database and searched the name on the notarization block of the revised will. The notary commission number matched a woman named Barbara Holt of Medford, Oregon. Her commission had been active at the time of the signing. I called Barbara Holt that afternoon. Her husband answered and told me that Barbara had passed away 14 months ago. I wrote that down. I closed the notebook. I did not move for a long time. I had used Eleanor Marsh's firm twice before, once in a professional capacity, when a client's estate case crossed into criminal territory and required the kind of attorney who reads statutes the way other people read novels. Once personally for a contract dispute that resolved in 2 weeks because the other party's attorney recognized Eleanor's name on the letterhead and called to settle before she filed anything. Eleanor Marsh is 55 years old. She has been practicing estate litigation for 26 years, the last 18 as a partner at Marsh & Holloway LLP in Portland. She is the kind of attorney who keeps 2 whiteboards in her office, one for the current case, one for the case she's building against the current case. She does not raise her voice. She does not need to. I sat across from her on a Tuesday afternoon with Sandra Park's preliminary findings, the probate filing, the original deed signatures, and a timeline I had constructed across 14 pages. Eleanor read without speaking for 22 minutes. When she finished, she set the papers down, aligned the edges with the habits of someone who keeps order on surfaces, the way other people keep order in arguments, and looked at me. She said, "The notary is deceased." I said, "Yes." She said, "And the commission number is valid for the date on the document." I said, "Yes." She said, "So someone used a dead notary's credentials on a forged will filed with a county probate court, distributed an estate worth just over $900,000 based on that document, and sent the rightful heirs certified checks for $11,000. I said that was my assessment. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I have thought about many times since. She said, "The confidence required to do this is the same confidence that will make it easy to prove." She opened one of her whiteboards and wrote 4 words: Sandra's report, tax records, beneficiary accounts, witness. She circled the last word. She said, "We are not moving yet. I want to know where the money went before we show anyone what we have. Can you trace the distributions?" I told her that was what I did for a living. She said, "Then let's begin." 3 weeks after my meeting with Eleanor, Derek called me. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was at my desk reviewing account statements that Sandra had flagged. My phone showed his name, and I let it ring 3 times before I answered, which is 2 rings longer than I normally take. He said, "We need to talk about Grandma Ruth's estate." He said it the way people say things when they have already decided the conversation is over. He said that some of the grandchildren, he did not say which ones, were concerned that I might be thinking about making things difficult. He said the family had been through enough. He said the distribution had been handled properly, by professionals, according to Grandma Ruth's wishes, and that he thought it would be a shame if legal fees ate up whatever goodwill was left. I said, "I understand." He said, "The house sold last month. The Josephine County land is under contract. The brokerage accounts were distributed in September." He said this evenly, as someone who recites facts they are no longer afraid of because the facts have already moved. He said, "This is done, Nathan. Grandma Ruth made her choices. We respected them. I think you should too." I said, "I appreciate you calling." He paused at that. I think he expected resistance because resistance was the thing he was prepared for. What he was not prepared for was agreement, an agreement that ended the conversation before he could finish what he had rehearsed. He said, "All right then." "Good." I said goodbye. I ended the call. I wrote the time in my notes, 3:14 p.m. I wrote down every word I remembered from the conversation. I noted that he had confirmed, voluntarily and without prompting, that the house had sold, the land was under contract, and the brokerage accounts had been distributed. That was information I had not yet confirmed independently. I forwarded my notes to Eleanor at 3:21 p.m. She replied 7 minutes later with 2 words, "Good, continue." Eleanor's strategy was built around one word, Gerald. Derek was the face of this. Derek had made the calls, signed the paperwork as assistant executor, and collected the check that Sandra's report would eventually confirm was funded with money that legally belonged to 4 people. But Gerald was the executor. Gerald had the relationship with Thomas Vetter. Gerald had the key to my grandmother's house for 11 years. Gerald was the one who had the opportunity, the access, and the standing. To make the case the way Eleanor wanted to make it, she needed Gerald in a room where he believed he was winning. The vehicle was my grandmother's house. The property had been listed privately before the public record caught up, and Eleanor's title search found the buyer, a limited liability company registered in Nevada, with a registered agent address in Medford, Oregon. The registered agent was listed as Gerald Allen Calloway. He had sold his own mother's house to a company he controlled. Eleanor set the document on the table between us and looked at me. She said, "He kept it in the family. He just removed the family." The meeting would be framed as a settlement conversation. Eleanor would contact Thomas Vetter's office and indicate that I was prepared to discuss the estate dispute quietly, without court involvement, in exchange for an accounting. She would suggest a location, my grandmother's former house in Grants Pass. She would suggest that Gerald attend in person. She told me why. Gerald had a business partner of 22 years named Frank Okafor. Frank was 60 years old and was, by every account I had ever heard, the person whose opinion Gerald Calloway most carefully managed. They had built their sales business together. Their professional reputation was shared in the way that reputations between long-term partners are always shared. When one falls, the other does not remain standing cleanly. Eleanor wanted Frank in that room. I thought about my grandmother at her kitchen table, the coffee that was always too strong, the way she looked at me when she said something she needed me to remember. "I want you to be able to build something that lasts." I called Frank Okafor and invited him to lunch. The house in Grants Pass had sold for $389,000 to Gerald's Nevada LLC 5 months before the meeting. The new owner, which was Gerald, had listed it with a local realtor 3 weeks later for $431,000. It had not yet resold. We met there on a Thursday afternoon in November. The air inside smelled like fresh paint over old cedar. Someone had repainted the walls to cover the particular shade of cream my grandmother had kept for 40 years. The kitchen had new cabinet hardware. The curtains were gone. The chair at the head of the table where my grandfather had sat, and which had remained in that position for 21 years after his death, had been replaced by a chair from a furniture showroom with a price sticker still on the leg. I noticed these things the way I noticed discrepancies, without reaction, with accuracy. Gerald arrived first. He is 64 years old, broad-shouldered, and walks into rooms the way people walk into rooms they believe they own, which in this case, he technically did. He shook my hand. He did not ask about my sister. He did not mention our grandmother. He talked about traffic. Derek arrived 4 minutes later. He had dressed carefully. That detail was not lost on me. Frank Okafor came in last. He is a quiet man, compact in his movements, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent 4 decades in rooms where words have real consequences. He greeted Gerald with the ease of long familiarity. He greeted me with something that I read as caution. He did not know yet exactly what he had been invited to witness. Eleanor was not in the room. She was parked outside, in a gray sedan, with Sandra Park's 16-page expert report, 11 months of bank records, a chain of title documents showing the Nevada LLC, and 2 certified copies of the original 2015 irrevocable trust my grandmother had filed with the county recorder. I sat down and waited. Gerald opened by talking about closure. He said the family had been through grief, that the estate had been administered by professionals, that whatever concerns I might have were understandable given the emotion involved in losing a loved one. He said this with the practiced warmth of a man who has opened a great many negotiations by acknowledging the other person's feelings as a way of dismissing them. I let him finish. Then I said, "Gerald, I'd like to share something with you before Eleanor comes in." He said, "Who's Eleanor?" The door opened. Eleanor Marsh walked in, wearing a charcoal blazer, carrying a document portfolio, and moving through the room, the way water moves around the thing it is about to go through, rather than over. She set the portfolio on the kitchen table of my grandmother's house, and she opened it. She said, "Gerald, Thomas." She looked at Derek. She placed the first document on the table. She said, "This is the irrevocable trust your mother filed with Josephine County in 2015. Irrevocable means it cannot be modified after execution." She set her finger on the filing stamp. This was recorded on March 4th, 2015. 4 beneficiaries, equal shares, total estate value distributed per these terms. She placed the second document beside it. She said, This is the revised will filed. During probate 14 months after your mother's death, she set the two signature blocks side by side. Sandra Park, whose CV is the third document in this folder, has spent 26 years examining questioned documents for state and federal courts. She has identified 11 points of divergence from your mother's verified signature. She paused. The notary on this document, one Barbara Holt of Medford, Oregon, died 14 months before the date of the notarization. The room was extremely quiet. Eleanor placed the third set of documents on the table. These are the wire transfer records from the estate account following distribution, disbursed to 4 accounts. She laid out the account summary. 3 of those accounts received deposits consistent with equal shares of the estate. She set the 4th record down last. This account received the total of the other 3 combined, plus the net proceeds of the house sale, minus the $11,000 checks that were sent to the remaining beneficiaries. She looked at Frank. She said, "Frank, you've been in business with this man for 22 years. Your firm's reputation and his are bound together in the way long partnerships bind reputations. Everything on this table was executed under that name." Frank picked up the transfer records. He looked at them for a long moment. He looked at Gerald. Gerald's mouth opened. Then it closed. Then it opened again. Nothing came out. The same nothing that comes from a man who has just discovered that the room he walked into was not the room he thought it was. Eleanor straightened the documents into a clean stack. She said, "Here is what happens next." Thomas Vetter's malpractice carrier was notified by Eleanor's office the following morning. His license is currently under review by the Oregon State Bar. He has not appeared in court since November. The Nevada LLC was dissolved by Gerald's attorney 6 days after the meeting. The Grants Pass property title was transferred back into the estate account under court supervision as part of the civil settlement agreement. It sold 4 months later for $416,000. The proceeds were distributed to the 4 rightful beneficiaries in equal shares. The civil settlement was reached without going to trial. Gerald agreed to full restitution of the misdirected estate funds totaling $841,000 after legal fees and verified costs, paid from his personal and business accounts over a structured period of 18 months. He signed a formal acknowledgement of the fraudulent probate filing. The criminal referral for will fraud and elder financial abuse was submitted to the Josephine County District Attorney's Office. The assigned prosecutor declined to file charges against Derek, determining his involvement had been knowing but not directing. Gerald was charged. The case is ongoing. Frank Okafor filed dissolution papers for their business partnership 31 days after the meeting in Grants Pass. He released a brief statement saying he had no prior knowledge of the estate matters and was cooperating fully with investigators. I believe him. His face in that room was not the face of someone performing surprise. Derek moved to Bend. His relationship with Patricia is, as far as I can tell, finished. Patricia called Diane 2 months after the settlement. I don't know what was said. Diane told me it was a long call, and that at one point Patricia cried. I left it there. My grandmother's cedar box, the one from her bedroom dresser with the cards and letters and rubber bands organized by year, came to me as part of the personal property distribution. I found a letter in it addressed to me, written in her handwriting, dated 6 weeks before she died. It was 4 paragraphs. The last line read, "I've made sure the record is clear. I trust you to find it if you need to." She had been right about me. I had needed to find it. It took 14 months. It was the most important case I have ever worked. It was the only one where I already knew the answer before I found the proof. The first restitution installment arrived in my account on a Wednesday in February. I was in my office reviewing a different case. A pension fund discrepancy referred to me by an attorney in Eugene. When the deposit notification came through on my phone, I looked at the number. I set the phone on my desk. I picked up the case file I'd been working through and kept reading. I thought about my grandmother at her kitchen table, the coffee too strong, her eyes on mine when she said what she needed me to understand. I want you to be able to build something that lasts. I thought about my mother's green ledger on the kitchen counter. Every transaction recorded, every entry honest. 2 women who understood, in their different ways, that the record is the thing, that what gets written down cannot be undone by the people who preferred it unwritten. My grandmother kept every receipt. So did I. She knew I would. That was the thing they never found.